Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and welcome to the Goucher College Crash Hour Auditorium. At this time, we ask that you please silence all cell phones. Thank you.
Let's give another round. That was incredible. Good morning, everyone. I am Ruth Lenrow, Chair of Goucher's Board of Trustees. I welcome Sally's family, particularly her daughters, Parker Sutton, Mary Page Michael, and Carter Brigham, her friends, and other distinguished guests to Goucher College. a place that meant so much to Sally. Sally joined our board in 1995. She attended Goucher in the 1950s and was awarded an honorary doctorate of humane letters in 1994, alongside Eugene Lang and the Honorable Kurt Schmoke. Sally was a true force of nature. Her undaunted devotion to Goucher allowed her to intuitively recognize issues with a deep sense of social justice, not to mention her humor, her style, and her grace. The Sally J. Michael Fund was established at Goucher in 2000 to fund a community service internship in Baltimore. To date, 18 students have benefited from Sally's generosity. I joined the Goucher Board in 2007, and Sally took me under her wing. One day, Sally called and told me she wanted me to serve on the executive committee as secretary of the board. Although I told Sally that I was still working full-time and had many other obligations, Sally ignored me. She just kept cajoling, kindly suggesting, and finally insisting that I had no choice in the matter. She did not take no for an answer. When Sally then told me I would one day be the chair of the board, I was certain it would never happen. But there was no way to deny such a determined woman. So here we are. Thank you, Sally, for all that you have done for so many people and organizations, particularly Goucher and me.
Good morning and welcome again. I am Jim Smith, and like many of you, a longtime friend of Sally, Butch, and the entire Michael family. This morning, the family welcomes and invites everyone to celebrate her life. Their wishes for a morning of joyous celebration of all that Sally was and all she accomplished. What a great way to start with the song Good Morning Baltimore, a song that reflects Sally's unbridled passion for this city. It was beautifully performed by musicians from the Baltimore School for the Arts. As many of you know, BSA is one of the many institutions that have flourished because of Sally's devotion and vision. As a board member, board chair, and of course as creator of the famous Expressions Gala. Thank you, Dr. Hardy, and the BSA musicians for helping us celebrate Sally. We will hear more from the BSA later. To begin, a friend of Sally's, Dr. Franklin Lance, will offer a blessing. He is the senior pastor of Mount Lebanon Baptist Church and vice chair of Parks and People. Dr. Lance's church is located across the street from the new Sally and Butch Michael Center.
Good morning, all. Friends, we're gathered here to celebrate and honor the life of Sally J. Michael. It was said earlier in a conversation I was having, we all recognize on a micro level the impact that she had on our life. And when you look at this place, you can see the macro impact that Sally had on all of us who are gathered here. I stand here as a religious leader because Sally was a woman of immense faith. For her, her conviction, her compassion, and her character were all driven by her deep and abiding faith in both God and the intimate goodness that she believed resided in all of us. For many of us in this room, we were influenced and inspired by Sally's faith. You see, I need us to understand that her faith was given birth by way of the compassion that was in her. Compassion, we need to understand at its radix, means to feel and share somebody else's pain. And because she felt the pain of others, Sally made sure that there were kids that had a quality summer program. She made sure that there was well-programmed green space and other outdoor activities. Sally's vision and conviction created programs that addressed those pains. And so we're all here now because Sally was a woman who loved beyond just the nuclear family, but she believed in the goodness that resided in all of us. If the truth be told, her conviction made it such that one was just glad to know that Sally was someone who cared about Baltimore and all of us. You've heard it said earlier that when the telephone rang and you saw Sally's number, the truth be told, you were not always happy to see Sally calling. You knew when Sally called that attached to that call was an assignment. And you also knew that because of Sally's aura, you could not say no, even no matter how hard you tried. But for those of us who received those calls, you love hearing the voice on the other end. Chickie Grayson would always tell me how Sally would call and she would start that call by saying, "Chickie, Chickie, Chickie." And so you knew that that person, that persona that was on the other end had something that was good that you wanted to hear. For those of us at Parks and People, we are grateful that Sally saw a 9-acre lot in the heart of the Mondama community and knew it was the place to relocate Parks and People so that we could serve people better. Where Sally saw a place of renewal, of energy, of enlightenment, for many of us, we simply saw a place of decay, despair, and dumping. But Sally's conviction and compassion was so contagious that one by one, we all began to see and believe in her vision. And so therefore now we understand that Sally is in essence passing a baton unto us. We believe that the God of the patriarchs and the prophets has instilled in Sally such love and such a gift that we willingly accept that baton. I need us to understand as we bless today's occasion that her labor of love does not end with Sally, but she has passed on to us the baton, and so that work continues in us. The Apostle Paul would say it this way: keep on doing the things that you have learned, received, heard, and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. And so, Sally, we need you to understand that we willingly accept the baton. It has been passed on to us. We will do the things that we heard in you, learned from you, received in you, and saw in you, such that that work continues. And Carter, I want to close with Sally's words: the best is yet to be. Just wait and see. Thank you.
Think for a moment of Sally as a friend. Sally was a powerful friend. Even while being involved in multiple projects, she could always be counted on to help someone going through a bad patch or just someone needing a friendly touch. My own story is an example. It is not important that it was me, but just illustrates Sally as a friend. Many years ago, after a divorce, my 2 young daughters were moving to New England with their mom. Sally knew I was distraught and that it was a dark moment in my life. She said, "Here's what you do. Parker will be in Europe with our class for 3 weeks. The kids can stay here, and you can see them every night. Then you get 2 tape recorders so you can send tapes back and forth." Technology was a little different then. She gave me a plan. We arranged regular telephone calls and did a lot of traveling back and forth. And both daughters loved to see Sally on their trips to Baltimore. So I've always thought that Sally saved my relationship with my 2 daughters, and I'll never forget her thoughtfulness and intuitive support from my family. And then I was lucky enough to become immersed in all things Michael. There were many meals, meeting at Sally's, trips to Maine and Italy, campaigns and projects, and a short list for me would be Outward Bound, Parks and People, Super Kids Camp, Baltimore School for the Arts, Schaefer campaigns, referendum against the NRA, which we won, and referendums on Harbor Place and the aquarium, which we also won. We shared experiences with our daughters, many sailboat races, and business stories with Butch, and everybody wanted to be on Butch's boat because that's where the fun was. All the while, I was learning from and sharing life with these 2 great people. Sally then gave herself the title of my Jewish mother, so she could completely feel free to offer support and advice at any opportunity. Most often the greeting from Sally was, "Hi, love." However, when she wanted to impart some strong advice, it was, "Now, Jim." From day one, Sally realized what an influence on my life was. I'm sorry, from day one, Rosie realized what an influence on my life Sally was, which leads us to the famous bridge story. Sally threw a bit of Butch's ashes off a famous bridge over the Arno River in Florence about 6 months after Butch passed away. And church bells pealed at a very odd hour. This was clear evidence that Butch's spirit was with her. Hence, in the family, it became known as Butch's Bridge. Now, this was a famous bridge, bombed by the retreating Germans in the Second World War and restored with the fallen stones from the river by the Italians. A perfect spot to propose to Rosie and have the spirit of Butch with us. But when I proposed to Rosie, her immediate reaction was, "Have you cleared this with Sally and Rick?" Rosie knew who was important in my life. During the course of the morning, we have 4 short videos created by the talented videographer Joe Rubino. They contain reflections from some of Sally's friends and were actually prepared several years ago to provide memories for Sally's 8 grandchildren. Now, one thought about Sally's leadership skills. You'll see in your program, 57 organizations, 19 chair positions, well over 150,000 kids served by Outward Bound, Parks and People, Super Kids Camp, Baltimore School for the Arts, and so much more. And she did this while working out of her kitchen. Her kitchen. No big office, no army of MBAs, no bank of technology. Her kitchen, aggressively armed with chocolate chip cookies. I don't think Harvard or Stanford offer a course in kitchen management, but they could consider it if they could figure out how it works. But only Sally knows.
Tell you about Sally? How much time you have?
There was always a sense of joy in being around Sally.
And she just had so much fun doing what she did.
If anyone asks about who Sally is, I'd say she walks on water.
Well, Sally Michael was a little bit of like a spark plug of a person.
I kind of think of her like a pit bull.
I would describe her as a ball of energy.
I would have to say Miss Sally is just awesome.
The combination of Southern charm and industrial grit.
In my mind, Sally is a superhero. If she had a cape, I'm sure she could fly.
I don't think she has an average bone in her body.
She's a relentless advocate, and you kind of get inspired by that.
She knew that behind every project was not about a me, it was about a we. And I must say, Sally also had the backing of her wonderful husband, who we knew, Butch Michael.
Every city would be fortunate to have a Sally.
I would definitely say that she was a servant leader. Sally was, again, as I think about this, was so humble.
I was working on a campaign event for Don Schaefer in, I think, 1971. And I was setting up a beer and hot dog stand. And I wondered who was going to set up the rest of this whole event. And someone said, "Oh, this woman from the Junior League, Sally Michael's going to do it." I said, "Oh, crap, the Junior League, that's all I need." And 2 minutes later, this giant energy ball came running in, about that high, and she just took over.
She said, "Let's do it," so many times in her life. She was an inspiration.
Sally Michael is the most magical person that I've ever met. And she's magical because she makes others feel like nothing is impossible. She has such a love for people and such a belief in young people and their capacities and abilities to do whatever they dream of. I think the other thing too, when I reflect upon her as a mom, and being a mom myself, that she takes such tender care, has taken such tender care of her children and grandchildren in terms of really nurturing their dreams.
Now, two special people, Bob Emery and Jackie Carrera. Bob runs one of the most effective urban-centric foundations in America, the Able Foundation. It is largely built on his thinking. Jackie was pitched to Sally by then Councilman Martin O'Malley, who said, "She's going to do wonders for some organization, so you better hire her." Sally did. Bob will speak first, and then Jackie.
Several years ago, I was at the same podium honoring Walter Sondheim, and I was struck thinking about Sally, about the comparability of Walter Sondheim and Sally Michael, good friends, both devoted to the city, good friends of each other. The fact that neither of them sought personal credit for what they did. Both were extremely self-effacing people. I don't think I ever heard Sally brag about one of her many accomplishments. In fact, when I looked at I thought I knew Sally. When I looked at the program today, I was amazed by what I didn't know about what she had done in her life. Sally was always cheerful, always ready to help others. I never heard her say an unkind word about anybody. If Walter could be described as Mr. Baltimore, I think it's only fair to describe and accurate describe Sally as Miss Baltimore. It's not surprising then that when the Greater Baltimore Committee decided to create an award in honor of Walter Sondheim to the private citizen for their public service, the first award was to Sally Michael. In fact, the award was created for Sally Michael. In the Sun obituary, I was quoted accurately as saying that over the last half century, which I've been involved in the city, and while I far from know everything that's going on, I know something about what's going on, I can't think of a more outstanding private citizen than Sally Michael. And it always amazed me, and that this daughter of the South, a pre-civil rights South, a suburban housewife of relatively affluent means who pressed her husband and family to move into the city. A common theme throughout her work that I was involved with was trying to overcome the centuries of racial discrimination and oppression and do what she could to try to close the gap between the African American community in Baltimore and the more affluent community in the city. Sally was not a talker, she was a doer. There was no task too minor for Sally to do it, as you've heard. She's not only a fountain of ideas how to improve the city, she did what necessary to implement those ideas. I first met Sally and Butch at Church of the Redeemer in the early 1970s. Christianity for Sally was a motivation for service, not for judgment. She embodied servant leadership as taught by the church. She was a giver and not a taker. My first involvement with her beyond that was when I worked as housing commissioner for Mayor Schaefer. Those of you who remember Mayor Schaefer knew that he was a person of deep love for the city and devotion to his job, but he was impatient. And he had a low boiling point. People who calm down horses are known as horse whisperers. To me, Sally was always my Schaefer whisperer. She was there to bring him down when I could not. Sally wasn't always prudent, I must admit. When in the Sun papers in 1987, it was mentioned that I was thinking very foolishly about running for mayor. The next morning, the phone rang. Sally and Butch were on the phone. Butch said, "I'm your treasurer." Sally said, "I'll head your volunteers." Fortunately, more prudent minds prevailed and the campaign ended. But the fact, any of you involved in politics know what a barrier it is to persuade anybody to devote 1 second to your campaign. And for Sally and Butch to call up on their own, something I've never forgotten. In fact, it reminds me we should always, when we think of Sally, think of Butch, her comparable partner. It's hard to imagine a better companion and support for Sally over the years. 30 years ago, a dinner group was formed to bring together various people in the community who cared about the city, to bring the races together, to have common discussions. And the first dinner was at Center Club. And after the dinner, Sally came up and said, "This is too cold, this setting. Why don't we have it at my house?" And for 25 years, every month, Sally hosted this dinner of 30 to 40 people in her house on Millbrook and then in Homeland. Among her many initiatives, the one that I would point to was the city intern program that she began to bring bright college graduate students to Baltimore as interns. This effort sponsored similar efforts over the years to add to the talent pool of the city. Teach for America, Ventures for America, New Leaders for New Schools, and many other programs have added thousands of young people to the talent pool in city, inspired by Sally's efforts in the early 1980s. As I speak to this group today, I'm struck by a sadness that obviously Sally's passing, but that I never expressed to her my gratitude, my adoration, my admiration, and my affection for her personally. I hope she realized it, but I'm ashamed to say that I never articulated it. As we look back on our lives, each of us, we should all take a moment to appreciate how fortunate we all were to have experienced the phenomenon of Sally Michael. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jackie Carrera, and I have to say I'm just so grateful to add to the record that Sally Michael was one of the greatest servant leaders of our time. I had the great fortune of being hired by Sally in 1993 as the executive director of the Parks and People Foundation. And I recall my first interview with her. Her reputation preceded her. She was known for being one of the biggest power brokers in Baltimore, advising mayors and governors and senators, like Senator Cardin, who is here today. I'm grateful that you're here, Senator, because I just wanted to thank you for so eloquently remembering Sally at last week's picnic in the park at Parks and People's event. What I recall about Sally from our first meeting was that despite her tremendous authority, she was lovely, no pretense, just humble. I also recall that during my interview, she asked me if this was going to be a stepping stone. Little did I know that apparently that meant we're going to be spending the next 2 decades together. I wouldn't even have thought twice about that. But years later, we were having a ball, getting a lot of things done. And she stopped and she said, I have a deal for you. How about I make a promise? I won't leave my job, she was the chair of the board, until you leave your job. And you won't leave your job until I leave my job. And I thought, I'm going to die in this job because she's immortal. So from then on, I have spent this partnership, this amazing partnership with this legend who was my hero, who was both my mentor and through the years became one of my very best friends. And as I got to know Sally even better, I learned that one of her greatest characteristics, her superpower, if you will, was her belief in others. She believed in me, and she believed in her family. She believed in our leaders, many people in this room here today, and she believed in, of course, Baltimore's kids. Take Outward Bound, for example. In 1985, Sally learned about an opportunity in Maine for kids to have a life-changing experience. She got the school system to somehow loan her all the school buses, and supplied with her homemade chocolate chip cookies, she sent hundreds of kids from all backgrounds to hike, camp, and discover their potential. But it was that first bus of kids. They told her that they had found on the way to Maine that the only thing that they could figure out that they had in common was that they all knew where York Road was. But when they returned home from that expedition, they said, "We are a family now. What do you want us to do?" She was determined for every Baltimore child to have that experience. So, with a $20,000 loan and some really good friends, she led the charge to build our very own Outward Bound school here in Baltimore. And before they knew it, her unsuspecting volunteers were building the pulling boats on a llama farm, rappelling from the top of an atrium at the first black tie and tennis shoe ball, and raising millions of dollars. And through her sheer will, Outward Bound was established, and since then almost 80,000 people have graduated, and lifelong bonds have been established by people who have shared both their joy and their vulnerability on course. And though she, despite how many times I've tried, never climbed a pamper pole in Leakin Park or traversed the dolly sides with a heavy backpack, she embodied that Outward Bound motto like no other: to serve, to strive, and not to yield. Kids were always a central force in her mission. So picture this. Now it's 1997. We are neck deep in running a task force on recreation and parks for Mayor Schmoke. After every meeting, Sally would pull me aside. She had to share this vision that she had for a camp for kids in Baltimore who were reading below grade level. It was April, and she wanted to open the doors to a summer camp, that summer, no less, for 500 kids at 4 locations with 50 teachers. And it would only take about $500,000 to do it. And we had none of those things. But lo and behold, only 2 months later, mid-June, Super Camp opened for nearly 500 kids with 50 teachers at 4 locations. And since then, 30,420 kids have had a summer to remember. It's just hard to get your head around the number of lives she has touched. It can't go without mentioning that Sally was a prolific, unapologetic, and fearless fundraiser. I'm sure many of you know that. One of her last projects was to raise the private money for the Parks and People Foundation to do one major park restoration project. She was appalled that her friends on the west side, like Pastor Lance, had to look at an ever-decaying Druid Hill Park, or what then Mayor Rawlings Blake called a pothole on the way into the city from the west side. And it was an opportunity for her to honor Parks and People, the organization that she had birthed in 1984, by establishing a permanent home. She raised the money for that project like it was the most important job in the world, hustling her friends at dinner parties, and even using goats to not only clear the invasive vines, but to draw attention to this transformational project. And today, true to her word, the Mondawmin community now has that beautiful 9-acre gateway to Druid Hill, a thriving community center, and an award-winning, thank you, Steve Ziegler, LEED certified campus for Parks and People. There are many stories, countless stories that are some so hilarious and probably inappropriate that I can't even say up here. Although I wish we had a week and a half to tell you, I'd entertain you, about Sally's unconventional fundraising exploits. But let's just say they involved things like hiding in hedgerows, funeral crashings, slipping jingles into legislators' budget books, Her superstition that required her to have bagels with cream cheese and olives before giving budget testimony every single year in Annapolis. I just have to say, Sally's generosity, her generosity allowed her to experience joys in life that most people never will. And she liked to call the pleasure that she received from fundraising her psychic income. Sally's family was her pride and joy, and she was full of gratitude for them, starting with Butch, the love of her life, who was on her mind constantly right to the end. During one sweet exchange about a year ago, when she had very few words, I overheard her wistfully whispering, "Thank you, Butch." Sally's spirit lives on through her beautiful daughters. You guys can close your ears for this if you want. Parker, Mary Page, and Carter, who all embody the best of her. They are kind-hearted, compassionate, genuinely good people, and her legacy lives on through them. Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said, "Being deeply loved gives you strength, while loving someone deeply gives you courage." We are all stronger for having been loved by this amazing woman. And we might all resolve to carry on Sally's legacy with the same courage that she derived from her deep love for Baltimore and for all of us. Thank you.
This is reading out of this thing that I wrote about Sally. Sally's success can be summarized this way. Her passions become your passions. But how does this happen? Why is it impossible to say no to Sally Michael? She feeds you. It is that simple. She feeds you. Sally believes that the fastest way to recruit committed hearts, bodies, and spirits is to feed them home-cooked meals. She welcomes you into her house, feeds you, tells you a story or two about improving life in Baltimore, and then you're hooked, pure and simple.
I cannot even tell you the amount of meals I had at Sally's house, but how they were food for your stomach and really food for your soul.
200-300 meals.
Oh my. I tell you what, I ate so many meals there I knew what was going to be served.
I can't count the number of meals that I had at Sally's house. I remember when she came back from Italy one year, she gave beautiful ceramic bowls to friends, and we would have pasta in those bowls. Bring the bowls over to her house for pasta.
I can't tell how many meals I had there because anytime I went by, there was like leftover lasagna or leftover salad or something, and it was, here, I have some leftover lasagna, you know. So I don't know if that counts as a meal or not, but I had a lot of them.
When I think of Sally, I don't think of her as necessarily an unbelievable cook, but someone who had the unbelievable ability to feed many people good food.
I would say easily 100.
I've had at least a couple of months worth, and that's 3 meals a day.
At least 365, maybe more.
I ate more than most because I would eat more than one meal each time I was there eating. She would be disappointed if it was a buffet and I didn't go around at least a couple times.
Well, I always have kidded Sally that I've had at least 2,000 free meals at her house and that I owe her a lot.
When I moved here, I lived with Sally for a year and a half while I was teaching. And that experience is one that I will cherish for a lifetime.
I needed a house, and it wasn't ready. And your mother said, well, you know, we'll fix the 3rd floor up. So she not only fixed the 3rd floor, I had my own monogrammed personal towels and washcloth, the whole thing. And I was residing in the Michaels' 3rd floor, eating their food, doing everything. There's no reason in the world she should have done this. I can't. But again, it's a tribute to her generosity of spirit.
And once again, Sally literally took me in. Now, when I say took me in, I actually lived in her house for a few months, and we were eating dinner every night and hanging out, and even watching Desperate Housewives on, I think it was Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock.
Chip went to the hospital, and we had just admitted him. I didn't even know anyone knew we were even back, and there was Sally standing there with a basket of like a dozen wrapped gifts, one for each day that he was in the hospital he could open. Chip, to this day, hasn't forgotten that.
When the first school bus went out to Hurricane Island with the kids, each kid got a little bag of chocolate chip cookies that Sally made.
We were in Annapolis, in the great halls of Annapolis, and Sally would bring out her cookies and start passing them out to people and warming up the whole crowd with her charisma, with her warmth.
She was trying to recruit me to a board that I was reluctant to join, and she sent my assistant chocolate chip cookies so that she would be sure to have an ally in my office supporting her.
Good morning. My name is Zeke Morrill, and I am Sally's oldest grandchild. I consulted with the rest of the grandkids on this, so this is about our collective experience with her. We knew her not as Sally Michael, the public servant, but as Toto, our incredibly loving, thoughtful, adventurous grandmother. My Aunt Parker gave her the name Toto when she was a kid because she was fascinated with The Wizard of Oz. We called her Toto all of our lives, so that's the name I'll use this morning. I have been asked to keep it quick and keep it light, but to do my best to give you all an understanding of her larger-than-life presence from our perspective. Her house at 4 Millbrook Road was magical. Although we've come to understand it played host to some serious meetings, we knew it differently. We knew it from the slide she installed going down to the basement that led to the ultimate kids' playroom that included a humongous chalkboard and a mini basketball hoop. I knew its wooden dresser with 8 rows of drawers, one for each grandchild, mysteriously always full of candy. We also knew the bottom drawer in the freezer that never ran out of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. We knew the GameCube she bought for the 8 of us. None of us were allowed to have video games at our houses. So Toto bought us a GameCube so that she could cement her position as a cool grandmother. She always had a knack for doing the little things that brought us all together every weekend to hang out. Toto hosted a fabulous Christmas Eve party every year that brought hundreds of people together for oysters, gingerbread men, and Chick-fil-A. It took days of prep, especially after she moved from Millbrook Road to Windhurst, and hired a crane to lift the Christmas tree to the 4th floor. One of the highlights of the party every year was the piñata contest. Uncle Harry, Uncle Paul, and my dad organized the kids by height, blindfolded us, and we each took 3 swings at the homemade piñata full of candy. As the oldest, and oftentimes the biggest, kid at these parties, I was usually sent to the very back of the line, and someone else would usually break the piñata before I had a chance to swing. One of the biggest failures in my athletic career is that my name was never engraved on the plaque next to the other piñata winners. Every summer, Toto took our entire extended family on vacation to Bethany Beach for weeks, ending with the 4th of July. Crabs, corn on the cob, homemade ice cream, brilliant fireworks shows, endless rounds of mini golf, and for me, lots of sunburns, have been the staples of those trips for as long as I can remember. And every 4th of July, Toto would make her signature American flag brownie cake with strawberries, blueberries, and a lot of whipped cream. Toto made it a tradition to take all 8 of us to London for our 10th birthday. She wanted us to go out and see the world, because all we knew was Baltimore. She dedicated her life to this amazing city, but she wanted us to realize that there are endless opportunities to inspire change in every corner of the world. After I got home from the inaugural trip, I casually told my mom that I only wandered away and got lost twice. Needless to say, every other grandchild has had a parent come to help chaperone. Another example of her desire for us to be world citizens. Toto saved up and set aside some money for each of us to travel after graduating from college. This past summer, I went on a trip around Europe with some of my friends and teammates from Georgetown. We walked in the Colosseum in Rome. We craned our necks up at the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. We saw what's left of the Berlin Wall, and yes, I got sunburned on the beaches of Mykonos. She did so much to make this trip of a lifetime possible. At a certain point, she had to hand over the keys, and it was just around the time I was starting to drive. So I began driving her car. She had a custom license plate that read Toto, T-O-T-O. The first order of business was not teaching me to parallel park or to use my turn signal, but it was to change the license plate so it wouldn't reflect poorly on her if I cut someone off. Or if I got into a fender bender during my rookie driver stage. For the record, I never had any issues. When I started putting this whole thing together, Greer shared a memory of the moment he started to realize the impact Toto had on so many people. Relaxing in her house one day, after a quick Google search of her name, Greer saw the top results and immediately turned to his mom, my Aunt Carter, and exclaimed, "Wow, Mom, did you know Toto's famous?" Growing up, she was always Toto, and we barely realized the effects of Toto's giving on the world. Leland recalled walking through her house and glancing at the many accolades she'd received from so many of the organizations she'd worked with. As the years passed, we gained a better understanding of her incredible impact on the world and what those accolades represented. We also came to understand that the passion and energy with which she lived her life could not be quantified. All 8 of us have volunteered or will volunteer at Super Kids Camp. It's been a rite of passage for us to help at a place so closely intertwined with our family. It's just one of the ways Toto has helped put us in a position to do something good for someone else. You might hear this more than once today, but one thing that all of us agreed could not be left out was the saying, "What we keep, we lose, and only what we give away remains our own." As young kids, none of us had any idea that Toto led this amazing life outside of being our grandmother. She had a way of making you feel like you were always her sole focus. It was the little things that she paid such close attention to that made each of us feel like the most important person in the world in that moment. The 8 of us, the grandchildren, all that we are is rooted deeply in the memories of Toto we will carry with us, in the memories we shared at her house, at her parties, with her abroad, or anywhere else. We will take them out into the world and hopefully, someday, do a fraction of what she was able to do. Thank you.
Anytime she asked me for something, I had to do it because I knew if I asked her, she would have to do it. So
Plus, she was so warm and genuine, and this was not about self. This was really all selfless, for want of a better word. So
it's funny, when I left being executive director at Teach for America, and other executive directors would call me. You know, I've coached and mentored them. I said, when Sally Michael calls, just do whatever she says.
It took me a long time to catch on to this, but she would call, and she's not a chit-chatter, you know, she doesn't call just to say hi. So she would call, and she'd talk about something, and see if, you know, wanted to go to a play or a movie or out to dinner or something like that. But then after 5 or 10 minutes would come the big ask. How could you say no to Sally? It was impossible, irrepressible.
If Sally asked you to do something, you just said, "Yes, ma'am."
You never, ever said no.
You never say no to Sally.
She had such a nice way about her that everybody wanted to help. Everybody wants to help Sally.
And everybody wanted to know what the next thing Sally Michael was doing so they could get on board and, you know, have some fun. Her passions become your passions. And you simply can't deny her this because she's so persuasive and she walks the walk.
Nobody can say no to Sally Michael. And I think it's because she gives you the confidence that you can do what she's asking you to do.
First time I met Sally was at a fundraiser at her house. She seemed to have a lot of those. And I said something about, wouldn't it be great if every school kid planted a tree as part of the curriculum? And she said, do you know about Parks and People? And I said, no. And she said, you're on the board.
She was very early recognizing what a diverse community should look like, so that people were of all backgrounds and religions and races and colors were welcome at her table.
First time I met Sally was with William Donald Schaefer, who had gathered young people across the city that he considered good thinkers, and we would guess where we would gather. We would gather at Sally's house, and she always had the best meals, but she was like the cheerleader to provide us with inside information about how great our city was and how important the city was to her.
Your house, really, on Millbrook, as well as the apartment, really became the Baltimore equivalent of a European salon, if you will.
First of all, Butch built a room onto the house so she could have meetings. I mean, how many people build a room onto a house so you could have meetings?
When Sally would have meetings and people over, whether it was for work-related stuff or social stuff, and didn't want anybody going upstairs, she would just put a wet paint sign across the staircase so that nobody would go upstairs, and it was very effective.
So when I think of having done a doctorate in organizational leadership, I can tell you that I learned more from watching Sally connect people and connecting a vision to an idea to actually enacting it better than I've probably ever learned from any book or any leader.
Even though she's the leader and the boss, you don't really always know it.
Yeah, when I was mayor, if I got the word that Sally Michael was on the phone, hey, you take that call, and you know that as soon as you hang up, you're going to have a couple more things you need to do that day.
Well, when Sally called, you always knew it was going to have an outcome-oriented conversation that she already had in mind. She knew the outcome, and she knew what she wanted.
What we keep, we lose. Only what we give remains our own. This is the motto of St. Catherine's School in Richmond, where Mom went to high school. It became her motto. Now, there are many ways to give, and you've heard about the many ways that Mom has given to children in the city of Baltimore. She also loved to give presents. Christmas was magical for us. We spent weeks working around the clock preparing for the Christmas Eve party. It was a party that grew from 24 people in 1968 to 200 in 2015. There was a home-baked gingerbread man with each child's name hanging on the Christmas tree, and the homemade piñata was filled with candy and little toys. For the adults, there was wonderful food, good friends, an oyster bar, and whiskey sours. It was a night of magic all around, and it has given our friends and us many lovely memories. And then on Christmas morning, my sisters and I would run downstairs and find the 3 couches in the living room piled with presents, 1 couch for each of us. And every year, after all the presents were opened, Mom, finally sated from all the gift giving, as well as completely exhausted, would fall asleep on the floor in front of the fire. On my 16th birthday, Mom and Dad gave me a beautiful sapphire and diamond ring. A new tradition was established, and each of my sisters received a ring on her 16th birthday. And when my daughter turned 16, I gave her my ring. When I was in college, there was a steady supply of care packages. In addition to brownies and, of course, chocolate chip cookies, she also sent Burger's cookies. Now, this was back before Burger's packaged their goods, so Mom would buy them from the stall in the Lexington Market, package them up, and mail them to me. My college friends all thought she made the Burger's cookies. After my dad died, Mom started a new tradition. Her birthday was February 28th, and the big ACC craft fair came to the Baltimore Convention Center around the end of February. So she called the three of us together to tell us she was going to give us each a sum of cash to spend at the craft fair. And if we didn't spend it, we had to give it back. So believe me, we love celebrating Mom's birthday that way. And after more than 20 years, I have quite a collection of ACC wares. For example, the scarf, the necklace, the earrings, the ring, the cuff, the purse, and if you come to my house, you'll see all kinds of beautiful and eclectic things and tons of mobiles. So after we started producing grandchildren, we still spent Christmas morning at Mom's. Christmas at Toto's, spread around a huge Christmas tree, was more extravagant than the presents Santa left at home. I explained to my kids that Santa had to take care of millions of kids, but Toto only had 8 grandchildren. Mom tried to rival Santa's gift list. Her list grew to include 100, 150 people. And if you weren't Christian, it didn't matter. Christmas was just an excuse for gifts. She really tried to find the perfect gift for each person. I have to tell you, I was so happy when her good friend Darielle Linehan opened the Ivy bookstore, because to support her, Mom started to give lots of books, and the Ivy wrapped them. Mom joked with us that her funeral should be a fundraiser. I see this is ringing true. And apparently, as we have learned, she shared this joke with many people through the years. But don't worry, we are not going to hit you up. After all, there are so many ways that you can give. Just keep in mind, what we keep, we lose. Only what we give remains our own.
I'm Carter, and the only position of authority with which I can speak is, as my mother might say in an exaggerated Southern drawl, her baby love child. Several people have said to me, "Thank you for sharing your mother with us." If you had any idea of the intensity, downright ferocity of her love for her children, you would understand when I say, no, thank you. It took all of you, multitudes of other friends, boards, events, a generation or two of children, and Baltimore-sized challenges to dilute my mother's love to a manageable level. She was my biggest fan and my greatest advocate, but she was the matron of honor in my wedding and my choice blessing. You know the macro version of my mom, I knew the micro. Here's the view from the back seat. My mother had perfect lips. She would put that pink Revlon lipstick on in one swipe while driving, smack her lips together, and it was perfect every time. She took a nightly bath with a splash from the big bottle of Jean Naté in the bathroom off my bedroom. Much of the summer, she smelled like Bain de Soleil, which was accompanied by the Saint-Tropez tan she usually sported. And indeed, sunbathing was the closest she came to a sport. When she'd prepare to go out with my dad, I'd watch her snap on those gold clip-on earrings from Tuxedo Pharmacy, hear her click across the wood floors in her heels, and breeze out, leaving a whiff of joy perfume and feeling her palpable enthusiasm leave with her. At the bottom of notes in her sideways looping handwriting, she'd say where she was headed and when she'd be back. Every time we parted and every night when she tucked me in, she told me she loved me. I love you something fierce. I love you to pieces. Growing up with my parents was full of fun and every day an adventure. For all intensive purposes, we grew up in a conference center. And while my dad was my mom's partner, my sisters and my best girlfriends may as well have been staff. Yes, we were wait staff, dishwashers, salesmen, promoters, clerks, secretaries, and you might come home and be tasked to make brown bag lunches in the basement for 500 firefighters. Or you'd get the 3 a.m. shift to read in City Hall at Mom's Readathon for the city that reads. Or be told that tonight is a command performance, my dad's term for mandatory attendance at one of Mom's events, causes, or awards. Mom and Dad would say, "We spoil you something rotten," in a sort of embarrassed tone on behalf of themselves. And when Mom did something to show her extravagant love, she would say, "Mother of the Year points." She did her regular and reliable over-the-top gestures behind this fantastic and illusory prize. If Christmas was a one-day, lavish expression of love, the Mother of the Year competition lasted all year long. Examples include the fact that I told my mother in 2nd grade that I didn't want her smoking. We'd learned about it in school because it was going to kill her. Literally for the rest of her life, she never smoked in front of me. Oh, she smoked all year long. And I just found a cigarette in a handbag a week ago, but never in front of me. I'd call her at 2 a.m. in the morning from college, and she'd answer by the 2nd ring with the television blaring and music going in the background. I'd tell her my worries, and she'd carry them way longer than I even remember them myself. For at least 4 decades, she'd scrimp by washing her hair at home instead of paying Mary at the hair barn on Windhurst to save the $5 before the haircut. But I'd come home from work to a beautifully wrapped box with a dress from Ann Taylor for no reason at all other than she wanted to give it to me. When I lived out of town, she would regularly send me clippings of articles she knew I would find interesting, and she'd always slip in $20 in the envelope. When my first child was born, she visited 4 separate times in one day the first week. I remember my sweet husband saying, "It's your mother." When I was a young mother with 2 small children living in Arizona with no support network, one day my mother appeared at my doorstep unannounced. I was in the neighborhood. She had been in Colorado. Even as recently as last November, when my mother had been nonverbal for 3 or 4 months, I was carrying on, talking to her as I did her whole life, as if she were 100% well. I was complaining about some injustice I'd suffered. Unexpectedly, out of her mouth were the last words she ever spoke to me. "You are perfect." So utterly absurd and meaning, and so utterly my mother. Today we use the term privilege in relation to race, class, gender. But the privilege I have runs much deeper than even those. I lived in a house where my dad said, "This was the best Christmas ever," every single year. Our refrigerator always had a bottle of champagne because my parents believed something good was about to happen and it was worth celebrating. So if I am buoyant and almost unbearably sunny, if I see obstacles not as barriers, but simply as part of the improvement process, if people say my ideas are unreasonable, impossible even, it doesn't deter me. Honestly, I run a round boat company. But certainly you understand, because you know from whence I came. In closing, I would like to congratulate all the contestants. It's been a 52-year competition that no one knew was taking place, but Mom, this last year, when you could no longer speak or communicate, the committee recognized that your life spoke for itself. So, you, Mom, are the winner of the 2018 Mother of the Year Award. Rest in power, Mama Girl.
It's hard to follow my two sisters. Thank you all so much for being here today. Before I begin, I want to recognize my mother's caregivers. Emily, will you stand? Michael, Joseph, Carolina, Maureen, and Tawanda. What? And Natalie, where are you, Natalie? Get up. They are from Cameroon, Nigeria, Poland, Slovakia, Jamaica, and good old Baltimore. We shared stories every day, as well as songs from the 60s, lots and lots of politics, and even NCAA lacrosse. Thank you for your tender care of my mom and of us. My mom was the most unlikely of leaders. She was a college dropout who later received an honorary degree, who wasn't from Baltimore, but was Baltimore's best. She wasn't rich, but she has scholarships, awards, and even a building in her name. She didn't have a paid job, but she worked around the clock. She was not an athlete, but started the first urban outward bound program in the country. She couldn't grow a houseplant, but created a foundation dedicated to parks. I share some of the same passions as my mother, and I am intrigued as to how she did it. I have been taking notes. I've come up with 5 reasons she got so much done. 1, engage. The key to her success, the most important thing she ever did in her life, was engage people in her work. She wasn't afraid to ask. Ask for money, ask for help, for advice, for favors. She had a combination of courage and nerve to ask so many people for so much. She surrounded herself with friends of such character and optimism. And if you were new to Baltimore, she wanted to meet you, whether it was the new police commissioner, the CEO of city schools, or my friends from college or business school. She engaged people in big projects and even in small things. If you went to her house for dinner, you became part of the preparation or the cleanup. She could have done it all herself, but when she got you to stir the soup, chop the vegetables, or clean the dishes, you became connected to her and to one another. I have a theory, and I want to see if I'm right. I think she might have engaged a few of you. So I am going to poll you, the audience, to see about your involvement in my mom's life. If it applies to you, please raise your hand. If you ate a meal at her house, please raise your hand. If you ate a dozen or more meals, raise your hand. If you served on a board with her, raise your hand. If you worked on a committee with her. If you lived with her. If you participated in a political campaign with her. If you participated in the City Hall internship program or participated in Super Kids Camp. If you attended the mayor's women's group or a brainstorming dinner. If you donated to one of her causes. If you attended the Singapore group with her. If you were involved with the Baltimore School for the Arts or the Junior League. If you were involved with Parks and People Foundation or Outward Bound. So I have proven my point. The first and most important secret to her success was engaging others. Apparently, it worked on you. Number 2, find allies in government. She believed in democracy, big D and little d, and the people who serve it. She knew that you could affect more change with policy and funding in your favor. My mother and I shared a love of politics. Election night was our Super Bowl. I remember one time when my mom was hosting a brainstorming dinner for Mayor Schaefer. Carter split her chin open and needed stitches. My dad snuck out of the dinner, and we went and sat in the Union Memorial waiting room. 30 minutes later, my mom and the mayor joined us. I remember thinking that night, he's just a person, a really nice man. My mom believed that politicians were good people, trying to make the world a better place, and the elected officials saw in my mom an honest person trying to do the same. She believed politicians could change the world. Number 3, begin. She believed in getting started, even if things weren't perfect. A few years ago, I was telling my mom about this idea I had for a dinner party in a park. I mentioned in passing that it might fit with Parks and People too. She had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's by this time, but 2 weeks later, she had a draft of an invitation to picnic in the park and a committee. Believe me, she was short on details, but her instincts were sharp. The first few years, it was a work in progress, but last Saturday, the event was sold out, 475 tickets. While walking into the party, I saw the lanterns that she bought that first year and the party she had a vision for 8 years ago. Number 4, have fun. She was fun to be with, and you wanted to be where she was. From my father's surprise birthday party for 50 in a castle in England, to schmaltzy rhyming poems, and the custom t-shirts from Captain Jerry's to celebrate virtually any event. When she taught leadership training, she gave out miniature plastic pigs for inspiration. She said the difference between involvement and commitment was like a bacon and egg breakfast. The hen was involved, but the pig was committed. When she heard there was a snowstorm coming, she would stock up, not to hunker down, but to have everyone in the neighborhood over. She would make a big batch of pasta Raphael, her tomato and artichoke sauce that can feed hundreds. When she bought the house next door, vacant for more than 25 years, she held a Ghostbusters party. When she was robbed in front of Petit Louis with her pal Leslie Shepard, she was worried about the bad press for the restaurant and always wanted an excuse to raise money. So, magically, the restaurant held a fundraiser dubbed Fill Sally's Purse, proceeds going to Parks and People, no less. She was not above hokey, always fun. 5, keep going. She was always forward motion. She was not one to wallow in sadness or defeat. She was the one at your doorstep, not to talk about your grief or disappointment, but to go do something, out to dinner, to a movie, to a lecture. After my father passed away at 58, she picked herself up, dusted herself off, and began again. She started Super Kids in the year after his death. More than 30,000 kids have gone through that program. She mourned with her feet. Finally, at a time of great turmoil and sadness in our city and in Baltimore City, I think about how much she would be doing right now. And then I remember the passion of her life was investing in the next generation. And not just her daughters and her grandchildren, all of you. I know she did not want to go when she did. She had more work to do. But you see, she trained all of us, all of you that raised your hands. She would tell us to grab our friends, share a meal, open your home, find great partners, join with like-minded politicians, ask for help along the way, have some fun, and just get started. And maybe bring some chocolate chip cookies. After the great loss of my mother, with her example, let us all pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and let us go and get to it, the work she could not complete. Thank you.
When I think about Sally, she really is the person who has had the greatest influence on my adult life. And I say that because the only reason that I live in Baltimore is because of Sally.
And I really was thinking seriously of staying in Boston, and I was looking for a place to live, which was kind of ridiculous, but that's okay. Leave it there. And your mother got wind of this. So I go home to my apartment on Beacon Street one day, and there's this envelope. It's from Martin O'Malley, Mayor, 250 City Hall, Baltimore. So I think, Martin O'Malley doesn't know me, and I don't know him. So it's to Deborah Winston Callard, 37 Beacon Street, Boston. Dear Deborah, I just heard the good news. How wonderful that you are moving back to Baltimore. Things are getting better here every day, and this news is icing on the cake. Sincerely, Martin O'Malley. Well, it was real clear. I mean, I was very flattered for about 30 seconds, and then I thought, wait a minute, this is pure and simple chicanery. It was your mother.
I think the question is, what hasn't she had an impact on?
I don't think Baltimore would be what it is today without Sally.
We all know what a difference Sally made in the life of our own city. But what a lot of us don't appreciate is how many people she touched who are now making a difference in their own states throughout the country. I was campaigning 2 months ago for an up-and-coming leader in Iowa named Rob Sand. He is the Democratic nominee for state auditor, big important statewide race. And he came up to me and he said, you know what, Governor, we've met once before. 15 years ago, I was introduced to you by Sally Michael because I was one of the kids that came in from out of state to work in her Super Kids camp.
For one of her big birthdays, we created a postcard that said Sally Moore because, and it looked like a Baltimore postcard, but it said Sally Moore in large part because I think Sally defines Baltimore for so many of us.
I mean, her impact in Baltimore is so deep and wide. I mean, it is everywhere when you go around the city, both in the sense of the things that she has personally done and in terms of the people that she has raised to give back.
So I think her impact on this city is alive and well, and still taking root in some of the next generation.
I really understood the passion that she had for education, and that passion I adopted. And it's specifically about Baltimore.
Sally gave young people keys to the city that otherwise they didn't have access to. So Sally made, let young people know that the city was theirs as well, that there wasn't, that didn't have to be those who had and those who didn't have. The seeds that Sally planted in young people's minds to know that they could be so much more than maybe that they thought they could be. The fact that Sally really expanded young people's perspective on what was their city, that their city was not just a 3 to 5 block radius, that their city was the whole city.
But it was primarily about kids, and it was kids that were Sally's passion and always her passion.
With children in this city, if they can see the light, they'll try to go for it. And that's really whether it was the summer camp, summer kids, Outward Bound, the track programs and so forth. All that we did was to try to show that kid that light, see if they could walk over there and walk through it. Because once they do, they get something inside themselves. Your mother and I both believe that.
And it's thrilling to have known her and been in a circle of her friends.
She's Baltimore's best, just absolutely Baltimore's best, and I love her with all my heart.
We'd like to introduce Congressman Elijah Cummings now,
And at the conclusion of the program, please join us for the reception outside the auditorium. Congressman Cummings has 3 of his Washington colleagues, past and present, here today, Senators Paul Sarbanes, Barbara Mikulski, and Ben Cardin. Elijah and Sally had a very special bond for many years based on their mutual commitment to kids. Elijah and Pete Rawlings obtained the very first Outward Bound funding from the state of Maryland. And each year, in fact, Sally scheduled the opening of Super Kids Camp based on Elijah's Washington schedule so the campers could be inspired by meeting Elijah on their very first day. Congressman Cummings is the son of sharecroppers. He was elected to the House of Delegates in 1982 and elected to Congress in 1996. He has been reelected overwhelmingly 11 times. He serves as the ranking member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. So he's known around the country as Congressman Elijah Cummings, fighting to preserve democracy every day. But in Baltimore and throughout Maryland, everyone knows who you're talking about when you simply say, Elijah. Please welcome Elijah.
Good morning, everyone. We can do better than that. Good morning, everyone. To the Michael family, to Parker, to Mary Page, to Carter, to Senator Cardin, Senator Mikulski, Congressman Sarbanes, Mayor Pugh, Senator McFadden, and to all of our friends that have gathered here this morning. I want to make it abundantly clear. I did not come here because a wonderful woman died. I came here because a great woman lived. Sally Michael was truly a friend of mine. She would, Jim said, have me come and speak to her super kids. And these were the mentors, and they would come from all over the country. And we would come to her house, and she always had me to talk to them and then let them fire questions at me. And I used to say, Sally, I just want to do a speech and go. And sure enough, she would always have a delicious meal and always some kind of nice dessert. And I would sit and answer the questions. And one day I asked Sally, I said, Sally, why do you have me come here? I said, there's so many other people that you could bring, and I am sure would inspire our young people. She said these simple words. She said, I want to build a bridge. She said, when I see you, I see what those little children in Sandtown, Winchester, and other areas of South Baltimore can be. And she said, then I bring people from all over the country, many of them attending Ivy League schools and doing great things, but have never been in the inner city. and they don't have a clue of what they're doing, Elijah. And I simply want you to be a bridge. And the more I thought about it, I was on my way here, I was thinking, this is a woman who could have been laid back, playing bridge all day, having fun, but she was about the business of building bridges. She firmly understood that our diversity is not our problem. It is our promise. She got it. And so I would answer the questions. And one young man asked this. He said, you know, when I see these kids, it's hard for me to see them in the future and see some of them, I don't see how they are going to get to where I would hope that they would get to. And I'll never forget, Sally got so upset. She said, don't you dare even think that. Don't you dare. And I was kind of surprised because I always saw her as this nice, sweet, mellow lady. But I think what she was trying to say is that she had high expectations of those children. And she was trying to figure out a way, in her own way, to make a difference in their lives. In other words, she was about the business of changing the trajectory of those children that the mentors were working with, but she was doing something else too. She was trying to change the trajectory of the mentors. Oh, that was Sally. I often have said that Sally's heart was in the future. Always looking forward. When one of her daughters mentioned the fact that the joke that she said perhaps her funeral should be a fundraiser, she's probably serious about that. You know why? Because that's a sign of her trying to reach into the future. And I shall never forget. One day I said, we were just talking, and I said, Sally, I said, you've done a great, this is one of the last dinners that I appeared at. And I said, Sally, you know, you've done so much. This is wonderful. You've touched so many lives. And she said, you know, Elijah, I have one regret. And every time I think about this, Mary Page, every time I think about this Parker and Carter, it tears me up. She said, my one regret is that I know I'm sowing a lot of seeds, but I know that I will not be here to see the harvest. In other words, she was saying that she was giving a lot, and when she watched these little kids, she just wished that she could live long enough to see them become the productive citizens that she knew they could be. But she did something very, very important. She gave them hope. She gave those, and I told her, I said, you're giving them hope, and you have given them high expectations. So Sally lives within my heart. She was a bridge builder, but she was something else. She was a person who placed conviction over convenience. In other words, she could have had that easy life, but she had a conviction to make sure that parks and people thrive so that other people might have a better life. She had conviction because she wanted to see children go forth into their future doing well. And she often took my little quote and gave it right back to me. And that is, our children are the living messages we send to a future we will never see. And so she did that over and over and over again. She made sure her convictions outweighed convenience. And so before you even get the idea that it may have been just a burden for her to do all of these things, let's be very clear. Sally Michael did what fed her soul. What fed her soul? What brought her joy? To see young people become stronger, to see our city become better, to be supportive of the Donald Schaefers and Mayor Pugh and so many others, O'Malley, and me. She was a person who made sure that our future and the things that we did, that we be effective and efficient. And so, but it brought her joy. So why do I say that? What she did because of you, and you. She was able to lay a foundation for so many other people to have a better life. I often say she brought life to life. Life to life. And as she got that joy, I'm sure she celebrated every time there was something new happening, something bigger and something better happening. And she was always looking for the next thing to do. And the idea that anybody would sit on more than 50 boards is phenomenal. And she was not one of those board members that never attend the meetings, never give. She gave everything she had. And I'm so glad that when it was the caregivers were mentioned, that you gave them a loud round of applause. Having spent 6 months at Hopkins, I know what caregiving is all about. And I too thank those caregivers. And they had an opportunity to take good care of her as she went on to heaven. But I leave you with this simple point. You all were a part of her destiny. I often say, what is a pastor without a congregation? What is a teacher without students? What is a doctor without a patient? In order for her to fulfill her destiny in life, she needed a support system. And that was you. Just look at the person sitting next to you. When we were asked to raise our hands about our involvement in her life and in her effort, I bet you not one hand stayed down. Everybody in this room, she was able to bring all of us together to make the world a better place. And so I'm truly honored that my friend touched my life. I'm so honored that I had the privilege of knowing her. I'm so honored that she saw something in me that so often I didn't even see in myself. She would often call me with a word of encouragement. Out of the clear blue, just call me. And that meant so much to me. And so there's a song that I love so much. It simply says, when peace like the river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my plight thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. To the family, please know that you had the privilege of being with greatness. And we do thank you for sharing her with us. And so as she goes on to dance with the angels, just know that she is touching the future. And as I close, I leave you with this simple statement. You know, when I think about Sally, I think about the Lion King. How many of you all seen the Lion King, the play? I love the Lion King. I am a Lion King junkie. Seen it at least 8 times. I love the Lion King. I know it by heart almost. And the reason why I love the Lion King, Mary Page, is because there's a part in it where Simba, the little lion, the baby lion, he's sitting there and he's saying, and his father has died. And he's sitting there and he's saying, Daddy, where are you? Where are you, Daddy? I thought you'd always be here for me. I thought when I called, you'd be there. If I could only hear your voice, it would mean so much to me. That's track 16. And in track 18, it says these simple words. It says, he lives in you. He lives in you. So when I saw the grandchildren up here, I said, that's Sally right there. There they are. They even look like her. When I saw the children, Mary Page Carter and Parker, I said, there she is, there she is. But when I turn and I look at you, Sally lives within all of us. And so now it's our job. It's like a relay. It's like a relay, ladies and gentlemen. She has passed the baton on to us. And so you who were reluctant to get on that board, get on that board. You who feel that you could do more for children, think about what Sally would do. Do more for children. You who would want to uplift our city but feel like you just can't find time to make the world a better place. And I know Sally will look down and she will say, well done. Thank you.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light